Hi, everybody. I'm your host, Brendan. Welcome to Badder Sports. Why is it Badder Sports? Because we go over the things you wish you could go over on other shows. We just do it with much more elegant, graceful, thoughtful renditions of awesome.
We do it with style.
Yes, some great style. Joining me today, Todd. How are you doing, sir?
Well, I got a dog barking in the background, but I got my Badder Sports mug. You got my Badder Sports Mets hat. We're doing okay.
Very good. Dad?
I also have my Badder Sports mug. I'm doing great. Absolutely
Cheers.
great.
That is great. So I have one question for tonight. Like we had before, the one question that I always ask this time of year as trades are upon us, does it ever benefit the team to pay the player's salary to depart from them? So in today's era, we have a lot of very large contracts. And in those large contracts, a team will call another team and say, I would love this player, but I need you to pick up part of his dollars. Some old trades, if you will, that occurred in this nature is Arenado with the Cardinals and the Rockies. In most recent memory, we have Scherzer going over to the Rangers and the Mets picking up a big chunk of change. So as a fan who has this team who's trading players, does that make you feel good as a fan? And since the Mets just did it, Todd, how does it make you feel as a fan, and are you for it?
Well, you got to think about you're essentially paying a ton of money for a prospect because that's what you're doing. So take the Scherzer deal as an example. So the Mets send Scherzer to the Rangers along with about $35 million. And what do they get in return? They get Acuña's brother, who's 4 inches shorter and still stuck in Double-A. Now, you're going to sit here and say, well, they're not paying Acuña's brother, but they paid the Rangers a ton of cash for the Rangers to take Scherzer. And the Rangers were in the playoff hunt. They're looking to go to the World Series and they're trying to make an impact. So the only way that they're dumping Acuña is if they get $35 million in cash. Is like, that's how I interpret it, is that it's not a matter of, hey, what I'm going to do is I'm taking the money so that I can also take this guy who's older, because it's not like Scherzer's underperforming. No, Scherzer was actually performing pretty well. He'd letting a ton of home runs and that type of thing. But the Mets are looking at it and saying, what can we do to build up our farm system, which is horribly depleted? What can we do to build up our future, which has been horribly depleted? What can we do to get, I don't know what they're doing but at the end of the day, you're paying another team so that you can get a top prospect, right? So in my mind, you're not paying for the veteran that's leaving, you're paying to get the prospect that's coming in. Does that make sense?
It doesn't make sense from a talent. The team is less talented today than they were before the trade. The only thing that makes sense to me is I don't understand the money for next year. Do they now have less of a commitment to Scherzer, which frees up money to build next year's team, which would have some value for them? I mean, they must got some relief from next year's payroll by letting him go, and now they got some money to go find somebody that more fits or whatever.
But you got a really unique situation with the Mets that I don't think exists with a lot of teams, where you've got an owner that's openly said he just doesn't care about the money. He blatantly has said he's willing to pay for players to go away if he can get top tier talent in return. And so that's what the GM's mandate is. So now the question is, and Brendan, going back to your original question, is that a strategy that's going to work? Can I just load up on contracts knowing full well that whatever happens with the contract, I'm going to eat the money? I'm going to absolutely eat the money on the contract, and I just don't care. Because I'm liquid. I've got the cash. So what what cracks me up is I'm in debates with people on Twitter, and people on Twitter saying, well, they freed up salary room for next year as if it's the NFL and there's a salary cap or something that anybody cares about. You didn't free up any money. You're still paying. You're still paying for the player. So obviously somebody doesn't care about paying for the player. So I think it's a really easy way to pick up prospects and look like a hero, but it's kind of cheap because at the end of the day, it's like being in Monopoly and you've got all the cash and somebody's got that one property that you need in order to form a monopoly. And you basically, hey, I'll give you $5,000 for Baltic Avenue. I don't care. Maybe Baltic Avenue will turn into something. That's essentially what you're doing.
What we don't know is that Scherzer asked to meet with management when they traded Robertson, and the next day he's getting traded. I just wonder if he told them, I don't want to play here anymore. You guys don't want to win. I don't want to play here. Get me out of here. I don't know.
I think the rumor was that deal had been in the works for a while, like 3 or 4 days before that. So Scherzer may have said that knowing he was on the way out. I don't know. I don't know what the story is there, but all I know is the Mets are still on the hook for the $43 million this year.
So if I back up and I look at this from my low level budget of my own little life, when you go and look at a really nice car or you go look at a really nice house, you're like, I think I can manage to make this work. And then you overspend. Then you're looking at you're selling it under the water, which is what I would look like here. Now, the difference in my question, there are players that do not perform on their contract and they're designated for assignment. We had that in Arizona with Madison Bumgarner, and nobody picked up Madison. So they couldn't trade him. God, they would have loved to trade him for anybody to get something, but they couldn't. So they just release him and nobody picks him up, and that is what Madison is. Now, maybe he'll make it back in the league, maybe he won't, but at the end of the day, the Diamondbacks didn't want to have him on a spot. The issue that I have with this is Max will perform. They did sign him for this money, and the Mets, no one could argue, were hurting to pay the salary. I would say that directionally, from the start of the year to today, clearly no one feels the good vibes of the Mets at the moment. Who's on the team or moving forward. So they're signing these people or trading these folks and paying for them to go away. But what does that mean for next year's offseason? And what does that mean for the team today? Because again, the team is pretty much given up. That's the way that I look at it. You could have paid Max. You could have kept paying Robertson. You could have just given this a go. I mean, they were completely out of flux here. So,
well, Scherzer was probably going to opt out of the contract at the end of the year. He's now the first professional sports athlete player in any sport ever to be paid $15 million in 1 year by 3 different teams. Because keep in mind, he's getting paid $15 million by the Washington Nationals. He's getting paid the $43 million that's now combined between the Rangers and the Mets. So, if he opts out next year, the thinking was he was going to get a bigger contract somewhere.
There's a big difference here between the Nationals paying him for giving them a series, a title, versus what the Mets did here. And my issue, again, going back to the Arenado example, the Rockies paid the Cardinals to take him and then proceeded to pay Chris Bryant. So it's not like they saved money or we could use this money on another player. They paid another team to take that player and move him away.
But it's the return they got. Like the Mets got for Scherzer, who is now arguably their number 2 prospect in the minor leagues. Now, that being said, Dad, you said on the rounding third that came out, there were 20,000 major leaguers in all of history that played in the major leagues, stepped over the white line and played in Major League Baseball games. But there were 200,000 that had signed Major League Baseball contracts, which means roughly 10% of the individuals who sign Major League Baseball contracts end up playing in Major League Baseball. Okay? So when I'm looking at that, I don't care that the guys are now my number 2 prospect on the New York Mets. The chances of him making the major leagues are slim for any minor leaguer. The chances of them playing in the major leagues and making an impact are slim, really slim. They're especially slim when the guy is in Double-A and 21 years old. Okay. And you look at the returns on some of these other trades where you are paying for a minor leaguer to come back in the hopes that someday, somehow, that individual makes an impact on your team, or you're able to trade them for some other person that's performing or something like that.
I think the tough part for me on this one, and this is just the reality of the system, is no one's trading away a certainty. Even to get Max, you're not trading away. Like, the Reds would never have traded De La Cruz. They knew he was great. They knew they would not trade him even if they were trying to get somebody. So when you look at the shortstop, now again, I could argue, this is what the Mets, from a Mets fan, hey, they have Corey Seager locked up. They just signed him from the Dodgers. We don't need a shortstop. Why do we need this 21-year-old kid who may or may not make it? We don't really need him. He's not going to come up and be that great. So from a Mets standpoint, you're like, we got their guy that they don't need anymore because they signed Corey. But if
the Mets have Lindor at shortstop, what do we need him for?
That's another guy that I don't like very much.
He's not doing bad this year.
It's not true that they don't trade away people who are going to make it. People trade away really good prospects to get something they want. You know, Diamondbacks traded away Dansby Swanson, -- picked in the whole draft, okay? So people do get traded. Not the only ones who did that. If you want something bad enough, you got your chance to feel you got the player we need. You know, it depends how deep you are in that position, and you know, if you feel you got a lot of minor leaguers that can fill that position, you'd give a good one away to get what you want.
Yep. What I don't understand about the Mets is that the Mets need pitching. And they keep piling up on infielders and they keep piling up on catchers. You know? So listen, if you're going to pay $35 million for a guy to walk away, get a pitcher out of it. Like get some sort of young pitcher. And maybe that young pitcher wasn't there to be had. I don't know. I just don't know that there's a lot of talent from a GM's perspective. And, you know, my vote for the patron saint of batter sports is Billy Epler. I don't know if there's a lot of talent from a GM perspective to turn around and say, like, hey, we want to make this trade. And to sweeten the deal, I got an owner that's given me a blank check to basically pick up the salary of any cuckoo contract I signed 2-3 years ago, or in the last 2 years. Like no matter what, I look like a hero because my owner's never going to hold me accountable for signing bad contracts. Because inevitably, what am I going to do? You know, I'm going to trade it away and then tell everybody about this great kid I got for $35 million. And I got to pay the kid on top of that down the line.
So here's my other thing that's frustrating to me. Do you think the Cardinals, when they traded for Arenado, do you think they regretted getting Arenado? There's nobody that I could even find that would regret to get. Do you think the Rangers are currently sitting there going, dang it, we got Max?
Not at all.
So these people who come over, and again, the old team's still paying the check. These fans are excited. They feel great about their team's prospect. So I, as a fan, when I watch my team pay a player to go away, what does that hangover look like for that team? Like, if you were to chart those teams and say, when did they come back into the playoff fold? Because the Rockies were not winning with Arenado. They certainly aren't winning without him. The Mets are not winning with Max. I would argue they're certainly not going to win without Max. And then if they trade away Verlander, like everyone's talking about, I mean, would they eat another part of the salary? Now, you can argue as a Mets fan, to your point, well, it frees up X, Y, or Z, or he already said he was going to spend that money, so it's already spent. If you're looking at your bottom line, you're like, I spent the whole salary, it's not that big of a deal. $15 million. So as an owner, is it a big deal? I wouldn't say it's a big deal. I just, as a fan in the recovery of that aspect, what does that look like? Because it's very rare to have a team pay a player to leave and then watch the team that paid that player excel, because it's very difficult to get the talent. The talent is what you're trading. And if you trade away bad talent, Nobody wants your bad talent. That's why you designate them for assignment. So clearly the person's talented, and then they want you to pay for him as a GM move. Hats off to the Rangers. Hats off to the Cardinals. Hats off to the team that gets the talent as well as part of that payment, because I think that what's happening for that team is saying, I would have never signed this individual for this amount of money. And then on the phone, they say, what would you have signed him for? Well, I would have signed him for X. Okay, if you pay X, I'll pay the remainder. Is that the deal? I'm not in any of these rooms. I don't know clearly, but to me, I would think that's the thought process. If I'm like, you paid a lot of money for that guy and I wouldn't have paid that. Now, I would argue as a Ranger fan, you got DeGrom from the Mets, and I think you overspent there. He hasn't pitched all year because of an injury. And
Won't pitch until 25.
You overextended the years, as we talked about. Now you get Max that you didn't sign. One of the good debates, if I were to change topics real quick, would the Rangers have been better off signing Max and letting the Mets keep DeGrom?
Well, I think obviously yes. I mean, it's not like the Rangers are hurting for pitching right now. I mean, we all thought that the Rangers were going to be a lot more injured, coming into this time of year with all the pitchers. I think none of us bet on DeGrom finishing out the season or even hitting 100 innings. What he hit 75. I don't think he hit 75 to 40 innings or something like that on the season.
Right.
The reality is the Rangers are better now and sacrificed the possibility of being better later.
Correct.
But did they sacrifice $35 million worth of being better later? Right?
No.
So them winning. So for the Rangers, if the Rangers go on and win the World Series and Max Scherzer happens to be one of the reasons why they go in and win the World Series, the Rangers look like winners.
Correct.
Because they're paying Max Scherzer a pedestrian, $20 million or something like that over the course of 2 years, and they win the World Series. They're getting increased ticket revenues, increased sales and all that stuff. Who cares if a AA minor leaguer who may or may not come back and bite him in the butt a few years from now, who cares?
I also agree. I also agree with that. I think the stress or the strain to win today is much higher, and the lack of a memory of fans is also very good. Very few people remember the trade, Dad, that you just mentioned with Swanson. Very few people even think about that. The Diamondbacks don't even think about that. They typically move on in a year or 2 years. So I think the
Mets fans will never move on from Darren Ruff. I'm just going to put that out there.
Darren Ruff. But back to my original question, Dad. Have you or do you remember or would you feel good about paying to watch a talented player leave for some hope in the future? Or do you buy into what the GM and the owner say to you? Because I think the owner and the GM say to you, we had to do this to free up dollars so we can sign X, Y, or Z. We've heard all that before. And we got this possible really great prospect because that's what they sell you on. Do you like that as a fan?
Well, if you've given up on the team, okay, you say this team's a bust. It's not only bad this year, it's going to be worse next year. Then you don't care. Anything you do, it's like we're going to redo the house, okay? We're going to tear down and build up. So that means guys got to go. They got to go because we got to get better. We want to compete and we can't compete. Now, if that's your attitude, if your attitude is, we're not that far away and this guy Scherzer is pretty good, what are we doing? Well, you're giving up. You're giving up on the team you have right now. I'm not saying they're giving up on next year, but this year they're saying this ship was built wrong. So we got to tear down and start building up again. If you really believe your team's out of it, you probably don't. It doesn't hurt you that much.
I think that's a really fair point because I don't think anybody in the Rockies fan base was sitting there going, Arenado's gone, we have no chance. They didn't believe they had a chance with Arenado.
I didn't hear much out of the New York press about how sad they were that Scherzer was gone.
That's them. That's cope. That's all cope.
They're just lying to themselves.
Everybody in New York was ecstatic when we signed Scherzer. Everybody thought Scherzer was great. Everybody was happy that Scherzer came back from injury. Every time Scherzer had a great game where he went 6 or 7 innings, everybody was ecstatic about it. And then all of a sudden, Scherzer makes comments about how he's ticked off that Robertson gets traded, and then all of a sudden, everybody in New York, now that Scherzer's traded, oh, good riddance. I never. Shut up. Shut up.
Last year in the playoffs, he died. What did he give up?
Yeah, him and DeGrom both died at the end of the season.
He playoff games.
I absolutely get it. But at the end of the day, we were 6.5 games back of the wild card with 60 games to go. 60 games to go. You're telling me that team can't make a run? They can't make a run? And so
six and a half games against one team is easy. They had 6 teams between them. So I mean, they had every day
maybe 2.5 teams. Because the 6 teams were not 6 real teams. There were 6 teams, but 2.5 teams of those are real.
Every day, some of the teams you're chasing is winning. Some of them are winning, so you can't pick up on them every day.
What I'm saying is if there was a team that could turn it around and go on a run of 40-20, 45-15, the Mets were the team that could do it. The Mets had a better chance of doing it with Scherzer. They had a better chance of doing it with Verlander. And, making some tweaks and that type of thing is probably where it'd be. Now, you're at the point where, okay, well, if we're going to go all in on youth, I want all the youth up and playing 24/7.
I'm going to close this on a couple notes here, and I'm going to get your take on this. What if we look back and the era that is the Wall Street era of this new owner realizes you can't pay to your way to success? Maybe that realization, because the Yankees are feeling that right now. They've paid a lot of money and their team isn't performing. The Padres are also feeling that way. So when you look at that from that perspective, here's what's even more sad. Was 2022, the year they lost to the Padres, is that the closest they get with this GM owner combo? And do they not get as close to that again? Because, yes, there's people that they can go sign, but to your point, they had a short trigger. They had a quick trigger finger here on the trade. I understand we're on trade deadline, and Dad, I understand your point. Maybe this team just didn't have that right interconnection that you would want. But are we going to look back at 2022 and say that was the year the Mets got the closest? And is this GM owner spend, and this is how you solve your problems? Because again, if you're very, 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 very wealthy, and he is extremely wealthy, I guarantee you he has solved a lot of problems with wealth. Wealth does solve a lot of problems.
So I'm going to give you this, and this is my final take on this, and I think this is why Badder Sports is here to stay. This is the anti-Moneyball team of all time. This has taken what they were trying to do with Moneyball and completely flipped the script, because Epler's a stat head, and what he's going to do is he's going to look at the stats with a blank check. Mm-hmm. So he thinks he is what Billy Beane could be with no budget. No budget, whatever, blow it out. And here's the reality. And I think this is what the Mets are going to realize. And if they can pivot fast, this is where their budget and their wallet's really going to help them. The team that wins is the team that has balance, that finds a certain amount of magic that nobody else can find, that finds the player that makes the hit at the opportune time and rises at that moment to become a champion. It's the guy that nobody's paying and nobody's expecting, that hits the bloop, that makes the diving catch, that comes in and closes out the inning. It's the Diamondbacks beating the Yankees. It is like that. It is the underdog coming in but it's not all a bunch of underdogs. And that's where Moneyball had it wrong. It's also a little bit of star power that's sprinkled in there to give the maturity and to give the leadership in order to make that work. And I think the Mets are really learning a hard lesson right now, a pricey lesson, but probably a lesson that the owner will take and develop on in the next couple of years.
And Dan, I'll get your closing arguments. My biggest issue with the GM of the Mets is that he was there with the Angels from 2015 to 2020. You could argue that he had a big checkbook. He certainly spent money, and he never proved to have success with one of the best players in baseball. So he had 6 years there, including the fun COVID year. He's now with the Mets 2023. The Mets interviewed several GMs. This owner interviewed several GMs. They said they like his philosophy. One would argue that this was his philosophy to pay for these great starting pitchers to bolster the lineup. You could easily say they were bitten pretty hard by the World Series of Baseball and the injury there. However, this team is learning a very tough lesson. We'll see if he still believes this GM's philosophy, because he bought into it. He bought into it very hard. Does he get angry and yank the GM at some point, or is this here to stay? I again go back to, when you're paying other teams to take your talent, you're rebuilding. It doesn't take a year to rebuild that. It takes a while. And the Rockies, in their true fashion, went out and signed Chris Bryant the very next year to make up for it. They still have not recovered. And I don't know where the Mets go from here. They spent a lot of money on very old pitchers. I'm sure there's going to be some free agents that are going to target. But if you're a player with an agent and you're like, I want to win, are you looking with cautionary eyes at the Mets, Dad?
As Marcus Stroman would say, not with this GM. And I would say, you're not winning with Buck Showalter.
Ooh.
Dad?
My closing comments are this. We are still very attracted by glitter and big names and big contracts. We were enamored with the Padres. We were enamored with the Mets. In the meantime, the Baltimore Orioles were stinking up the farm for a lot of years and drafting amazingly good young players that they have on the team now at a bargain, and they are playing hard. They're playing well together, and they are the most exciting team in baseball with no glitter, no glitz. If you ask someone on the street to name 3 Baltimore Orioles, they wouldn't be able to do it, and they're the best team, as Tampa has been right along. So I think that we keep looking for the big money. I mean, what huge disappointments the Mets and the Padres are for all that they invested. I mean, it's shocking in a time when so many teams can make the playoffs. Neither of these teams look like they're going to do it. And then you got the Baltimore Orioles. So we got to look at what's working. That's my point.
And your closing point is great for Batter Sports as well. Baltimore and Tampa are the lowest paid in the AL East by a mile. And compared to the Yankees, even Boston, even Toronto, all have spent a lot of money. And they're all doing well. All 5 of those teams have winning records. None of those teams, in my opinion, have performed poorly. But when you have Baltimore and Tampa performing so much better than those other teams, it is quite unsettling for the teams that have spent a lot of money, because it's very frustrating to see that happen. To your point, Dad, about Baltimore, think about that team in the minors, playing together, growing together, and then coming up into the major leagues. There's something special about that too. When you are with your teammates for the minor leagues and you all talk about making it to the show one day and how you can't wait to perform and show off your talent, and then you all get to go to the show together. Those guys were together through the AA, AAA, proving themselves, going through the grind, being on buses together. They have that connection. And if you haven't watched a Baltimore game or haven't watched them play, you can tell. And Todd, to your point, you can feel it. So it's...
And by the way, and I'll put this out there, the Orioles payroll, their active payroll, is half of the Mets retained.
Half.
Of the Mets retained.
So this weekend, the big mighty Yankees with the big payroll came into town in a must-win series, and Baltimore took 2 out of 3.
Out.
And not only did they take 2 out of 3, they took 2 out of 3 and they pulled their starters early and still won those games. Because I believe if you're Baltimore and you're that manager, you know you need better starting pitchers in the playoffs. Whether they get them or not is a whole nother ball of wax. Now, on the other hand, in closing this out, the other argument to this is you have like the Dodgers, you have teams like the Atlanta Braves that are just frustratingly consistent. They're able to add the right talent. They're able to add the right people. At the end of the day, they do well. I don't like the Dodgers. Todd, I know you don't like the Braves. And I watch these teams just perform, and it just makes me shake my head. And I go, how do they continue to do it? Because they have really great concrete pillars of greatness where they want it, and then they fill in.
Oh my gosh, I don't want to stretch this out, but I just read an article today that One of the people in line for most valuable player in the National League is Matt Olson. The Braves lost their leader on free agency when Freddie Freeman went to the Dodgers. They turned around and immediately signed this guy from Oakland named Matt Olson, who is now maybe going to be it's him or Acuna, right, for most valuable player. The Braves don't miss a beat. It doesn't matter what's going on. They're amazing.
Yeah, so if you guys have any comments there to add to players that were paid to say bye, add it to the comments. We'd love to see your input. I know there's some good ones. The Rockies have several. Mets have some good ones. But we'll see what happens to the Mets over time. We'll see what happens to these teams. And we'll see what happens to the Rangers getting Scherzer. I am your host, Brendan. That is Todd. That is my dad. Thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day.